All right, Damon, how's the PhD going?
It's good. It's good. We are coming into the home stretch of things. A lot of writing, a lot of polishing of data sets, that kind of thing. And then we're headed into a world of a little bit of uncertainty, I think. So myself, people more broadly, I think that the universities are seeing a little bit of a shakeup in response to some of the funding freezes, especially with respect to the NIH, the NSF, a lot of the funding agencies that are typically responsible for providing funding, providing guidance for a lot of these research projects, mine included, are going through transition right now. And sometimes some parts of that transition are good, some parts of that transition are bad. But I think it has everybody, Duke as an institution included, taking new assessment on these kind of things.
What ends up like what's I mean, obviously there have been labs, I'm sure that like at a time when they need funding, they're not able to. What are like the typical avenues for a research lab like in this moment right now to go through?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm far from the most knowledgeable about kind of this system as a kind of an entire entity, but just speaking from my experiences and speaking from what I understand about kind of how this works typically, especially in you know R1 institutions, Duke, and similar within even in kind of the other non R1 institutions like the undergraduate university from which I came and did research. At the R1 institutions, there is some capital pooling, capital sharing, and so there are indirect costs associated with all these grants that go to helping fund support staff, admin, common things like electricity bills or universal supplies that might be used. So there is some resource sharing in that sense. That said, all PIs essentially operate as small businesses inside of the universities, and they're kind of responsible for maintaining their own funds. And so you're going to see some PIs that are struggling, meaning they might have to take on more of a teaching role, especially in the non R1 institutions to help support their lab efforts or to kind of like keep them afloat, so to speak, until there is more funding dedicated for the labs. Otherwise, universities are moving some funds around to help support people in this kind of time of uncertainty. And then, as a last resort, a lot of these universities are scaling back a lot of the funding efforts that they had previously allocated. So, we've heard of at least three universities that have confirmed some level of slowdown in the spending. The degree of which the slowdown is taking place is still relatively unknown, at least to me. But Cornell, UPenn, and Pittsburgh, at least as of taping this episode, have all put large reductions in headcount, at least in the PhD programs. So they're bringing on less PhD students because they simply can't guarantee the funding that would otherwise kind of have been guaranteed in this kind of new light of funding, freezes and kind of the stoppage of these meetings that are taking place. And that's affecting people at all kind of rungs of the PhD process. So new cohorts can't come in. Some of the cohorts that are already in PhD programs that might have otherwise had their funding guaranteed or their work was previously being funded, they now don't know exactly when that money's coming, if it's coming, if that money's going to be reallocated. I know a lot of the grant managers, project managers, that kind of thing, that were in previous positions at the NIH or otherwise have been either reassigned. They have moved on, maybe electively, maybe have been let go for one reason or the other. And so there's just a lot of flux, a lot of uncertainty. And I think that is affecting both the attractiveness of a PhD right now and also the prospects of people that are post PhD.
So, what are the major career options? Where do people look after maybe the last year of people that finishing PhDs? Do you see many of them anecdotally going in toward industry or trying to get postdocs? Like, what are the viable alternatives?
It's a good question. I mean, the landscape is very much shifting, right? I mean, a lot of this like quote unquote uncertainty is the result of the last, call it 4 to 5 weeks. And so people are kind of in real time
Hmm.
reacting to these things, right? A lot of these fundings that would have otherwise been there from the universities, like people are having postdocs canceled as an example. Like they thought they were going to go to do a postdoc this summer, but now all of a sudden that money is not there for them. So those people are obviously pivoting. That might mean into a different postdoc at a different, hopefully better funded or maybe otherwise funded university, or it does mean some sort of industry kind of apprenticeship, internship, or something like that. And so it is, I certainly wouldn't call it panic, at least not in my most immediate peer group, but I think there is a level of discovery right now that's happening kind of across the board of what is my next step. And the safest of all those bets is to look into the private sector in which the funding for those companies, whether it be, the biggest of the few, Johnson and Johnson, Novo Nordisk, GSK, those kind of things. I mean, there's many others. But those industrial positions are, probably more stable at the moment. Although, again, as we talked about many times on this podcast and elsewhere, the macroeconomic environment of hiring is kind of down across the board, especially in tech and biotech. So I do think, while I think most people remain optimistic, that there are headwinds. I think, candidly. I'm curious, like, say you've got a lot of peers, friends, that kind of thing in similar phases or kind
Lakshay
of
has
various
friends?
phases.
No way.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What the hell? I'm the personality hire of this group. Put some respect on my name. What the hell? A lot of them who are in PhD, so they're all pretty like far along, maybe like 2 or 3 years in. Some of them are like close to wrapping. A lot of them are very like concerned for what it means for folks who are just entering. For folks who have been in it, they're not super worried. Like again, all my friends who are in PhDs, they're in like tech PhDs too. So like they never had the intention of going to a postdoc or anything like that. They all very much want to go straight to industry. So I don't think that concern really worries them that much. Obviously, there's still like stuff happening in the tech sector generally. Like we're still seeing layoffs and a bunch of kind of like clearing waves happening every now and again from big companies. But nothing that's like really pressing anyone too much. I don't think I know anyone who's trying to go into a PhD like this year. I haven't heard of anyone like having to deal with like a rescinded offer or a deferred offer on the PhD program or anything yet. But at least from my friend circle, everyone seemed pretty okay because they're in the middle of it still. And it seems like their universities are at least talking in a way that seems to be that resources are committed.
PhDs are cheap. They're like the cheap labor in the system. But I can imagine the more expensive labor in the system is probably where you would try to find cuts first.
Yeah, I think it's that, and I think it's the PhD itself, like the PhD salary is cheap relative. That's 100% true. But the funds that are going to provide the supplies necessary to do these fairly capital intensive PhDs, I think are where the question is, right? Because where, yes, my salary is quite cheap. The reagents that I need to perform my experiments and the equipment I need to perform the experiments on are not cheap. And like the grant money funds both of those things. And in the case of that money not being available, while you certainly could scrap enough together to pay the people, like, do you have enough to then also run the experiments and publish the results? I think is where people's concern is. And I think, to be clear, most of the universities aren't necessarily in problematic space. They're just more or less taking a wait and see approach before overcommitting themselves and putting themselves in kind of a perilous position.
It is interesting. I mean, not necessarily our position, but especially over the time that we've been building ScholarAI, I've been exposed to a number of startups who are doing like grant searching or like finding work for researchers. I do really wonder how those groups are doing, because their whole thing was being able to like work through government funding opportunities and find those for other folks. And it was just a very, very popular like AI LM verticalized space that I have to assume is like being very, very highly stress tested right now.
All right, let's jump into a topic.